Very happy to have Shelly Brisbin with us today. Shelly is a producer and reporter at the Texas Standard. She is a contributor to Six Colors, and she's also the host of Parallel, a podcast about tech and accessibility, which I've been fortunate enough to be on. It's been a bit since we talked. How you doing?
I'm well, Ken, and I need to get you back on Parallel. I always forget to repeat my really good guests. I figure once I've asked them, I don't want to go back to the well too often, but you would absolutely be welcome anytime.
I see, because I'm going to call you back to be on this in about 2.5 weeks. Because the well's working. I just keep doing it. So let's do your resume. I know I just did a tiny bit of it, but your history in journalism, your history in tech. We talked about you being at the Texas Standard, but if you want to tell people a bit more about that too.
So I started in tech journalism a long time ago working for a company called PCI that did niche tech publications that covered things like digital equipment workstations and convergent workstations and Unisys devices, stuff people hadn't really heard of, but it allowed me to sort of cut my teeth and learn how to write about technology. Supercomputing news was also a thing I did that I was really proud of. And then I ended up sometime later, after spending some time doing system administration work for a state agency, I ended up at Mac User Magazine in the 90s, and I was an editor there. I covered networking and just general interest Mac stuff. And then after that, I spent a bunch of years writing tech books, mostly about the Macintosh in general, about Wi-Fi networks, about about web development and some desktop publishing too. And then that I sort of migrated into various other freelance gigs and tech publishing, book projects. Texas Standard was sort of my exit from full-time tech publishing. Texas Standard is a daily statewide public radio news show, and so I found myself wanting to do something beyond tech, especially as political events in the world got interesting back in the day. And then now I'm sort of combining the two of them, because somewhere before I started at Texas Standard, I also took an interest in accessibility technology and finding and then teaching people about that stuff, because there wasn't a lot of writing being done. So now I'm kind of dividing my time between the day job, which is Texas Standard, and then a lot of freelance work that is on the Six Colors, where we talk about Macs and other Apple things, and then also Parallel and the iOS Access for All book that I write each year about accessibility for the iOS platform.
Now, we're going to be focusing a lot on accessibility today, but not entirely. I guess the one thing I have, though, if there was one thing that people left this conversation with, like, new audience, new show, you and I have talked about this stuff over time, but if people leave this conversation able to articulate one thing about accessibility in tech, what would you want that to be?
I want people to know that accessibility is just like any other feature of a tech product and should be evaluated as such. So it's not nice and sweet and cuddly that a company provides accessibility. It's something that should be evaluated on how well it actually works for people who use and who need it. And that creates sort of much more rigorous understanding of are they doing a good job? Are they not doing a good job? So I would just encourage people to think about accessibility as any other feature, just one that sometimes can be very essential to the way people use technology.
That's such a weird thing to think about, though, because I don't want to say her name lest I turn on HomePods across the country, but there is a virtual assistant that Apple has, and to me it's still magical, and to other people it's the worst thing that ever happened, because it won't tell you a good joke if you ask it. I mean, I don't know. It's not a warm and cuddly thing. At the same time, I think about at a shareholders meeting 3 or 4 years ago, somebody asked Tim Cook to justify every dollar that Apple spent. And he said, if you're looking for ROI on our accessibility features, for example, our screen reader, buy a different stock. I mean, is it because it's not the kind of thing that turns up often for people who aren't looking for it, that there's a misunderstanding about it?
I think there's two things. I think people who don't use accessibility in their tools in their lives think in terms of how we're doing people with disabilities a favor. Like we're making our products accessible and available to them, and that's somehow a nice thing that the company is doing. In truth, there are ADA requirements in the United States and other laws around the world that specify accessibility requirements. Some are good, some are not, but the companies are not doing this entirely out of altruism, and that's not a knock on Apple or anybody else at all. And they don't have to do everything that they specifically do in terms of accessibility, but there are reasons that those features exist, whether it's getting an educational contract. That was, in fact, famously when Apple first introduced the voice over screen reader for the Mac, it was because they weren't going to get a really, really important contract with a whole state that was going to provide laptops for their students if they didn't have accessibility. And so that is the ROI side. The other part of it, the creative part, where accessibility is actually tuned to the needs of the people who use it because maybe they work at Apple or maybe Apple has gotten a lot of feedback from those people, that doesn't have to be ROI driven. And Apple has every interest in the world in making that a warm and fuzzy story, or a story of how we're doing something that's really interesting and maybe above and beyond what the law requires. And it's only natural that Apple would do that. But the problem is that it's kind of a disservice to somebody like me to think about accessibility as an altruistic thing that Apple's doing. I'm thinking about, does it work for me? Are the bugs being fixed? Are the new features exciting to me or to somebody who needs voice control or switch control or whatever it is? And so I welcome those who want to give Apple credit for what they're doing as a sort of a societal benefit. But from my point of view, I want to think about it. I want to hold them to account for how well the feature works, just as we do that with the virtual assistant, who some people are infuriated by and some people think is awesome.
Right. I want to get to what Apple is doing right and what Apple's doing wrong in a moment, but you actually, what got me to want to talk to you about this now is I was on Mastodon, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and you said that it was really exciting to you to see rumors about accessibility features turning up in, if there's any such thing as mainstream tech press, there are rumors about accessibility features turning up in mainstream tech press. Talk to me about that excitement.
Well, a lot of times when you see accessibility covered in mainstream tech press, it's usually a headline that says 5 secret features in iOS. And all that means is we found the accessibility pane and we figured out there's some stuff in there that nobody has ever looked at who doesn't have a visual disability or physical disability or whatever. And so a lot of those headlines are, isn't it great that it exists? Here's a thing you don't know about. Well, that doesn't make accessibility better. It makes it more known to a wider audience of folks who may, in fact, encounter accessibility needs at some point in their life. You know, I talk to people all the time who say, my mom doesn't see as well as she used to do, or she doesn't hear as well. What does iOS have for her? And I can answer those questions. But the truth is there are people who are born with or acquire disabilities every day who want just as premium an experience with their Apple products as anybody else does. And so they have pretty high expectations. But the problem is that if all the press is about, here's these secret features, isn't it great that they exist? And none of it is, hey, here's what Apple might be doing next, in the same way that they would say that about AI or the virtual assistant or shortcuts or anything like that, it does a disservice to the development of accessibility as a set of tools that Apple should be held accountable for.
So let's dive in. What is Apple getting right?
So I think they keep adding innovation, and especially they do an interesting thing in accessibility. It isn't really thought about quite this way by most folks, but a lot of times accessibility ends up being a proof of concept for a feature that goes wider. And in fact, AI, particularly in machine learning, has been applied to accessibility in real specific ways. Things like live text that came around a few years ago existed in the form of text recognition inside accessibility, inside of VoiceOver first. So the idea that you could point your iPhone at some text and it would scan it and read it for you. That's something that was born inside the accessibility suite. Image recognition, there are various things that AI can do in terms of recognizing stuff, whether it's pictures, or whether it's text, or whether it's interpreting what is in an image and spitting it back to you as text or speech, that really began in accessibility. And in one way, that is good for the wider world because we sort of guinea pig those features for you as accessibility users. And it's good for people in accessibility because people who use accessibility features, because it means that we get to play with new stuff and we get to understand kind of the direction that Apple's going. And I think sometimes people who want to predict what Apple has up their sleeves would actually do well to look at what is happening in accessibility. Not always, you're not always going to learn something about it, but there is a way in which it becomes a nice playground for Apple, and also for those of us who think, oh, well, isn't it cool? How are we using machine learning today to make our products more accessible and to use that dreaded phrase, to change our lives?
Right.
It is a dreaded phrase for me. Maybe not to you, but it's just me.
So talk to me. Okay, well, because you brought up a couple of things that are interesting to me. Let's quickly, or take as long as you want to, what's Apple getting wrong?
Well, I think they're not updating some of the most important accessibility features they have, particularly VoiceOver for the Mac has been sort of allowed to sit there. Apple will do an amazing accessibility feature that becomes critical, and then they'll go on to something else, or they'll have so many things to do that they don't necessarily come and pick up after themselves in terms of the bugs. Mm-hmm. VoiceOver for Mac really kind of needs an overhaul. Braille support in iOS and Mac OS has always been good, especially iOS, has always been really good, and Android for a long time was terrible. So Apple could always say, if you're a Braille user and you want to connect a Braille display to our device, the Apple devices are absolutely the best. And that's true, except that there are often show-stopping bugs in Braille that have been allowed to sort of fester. And meanwhile, Android is kind of catching up. They haven't caught up yet. So I think sometimes just resting on their laurels a bit is the main issue.
Sometime I want to have you on to talk about Braille on an iPhone.
Or I am not an expert. I can do it, but I'm not a super user of Braille. I can do it though.
I have a few questions, but I don't think that's the direction we're going today. But I'm kind of curious about it. I'm actually curious about the biggest thing that Apple has come out with in a while, theoretically, which is of course Apple Vision Pro. You got to try it out.
Yeah, I had a demo, which is a version of the demo that people who went into the store could have. And I say that because I had a choice. Before I had the demo, I could go in there blind, so to speak, and say, give me the demo, I'll figure out my own accessibility. Or I could call them ahead or put in the notes, hey, I'm an accessibility user. I could use all the pointers I can get to the accessibility features of this thing. And I chose to do that latter thing. I was like, all right, let's not waste time figuring out whether I can use this thing in accessible ways. Let's have you do that homework, you at the Apple Store, do that homework for me first. And so I got to see a lot of accessibility features. So the basis of Vision Pro in terms of input is eye gaze, looking at a thing and acting on it. I have trouble doing that with my low vision because I can't necessarily focus in on this tiny little object, this tiny little target. And so I tried using head access and using wrist access and using pointer finger access. So what I got to see a little bit of, but not in any detail, was the many different ways you can do input on the Vision Pro. I've also since I've watched videos and I've read articles by people who are using Vision Pro without hands or without there's some blind folks that are doing it. There's some other low vision people that have done it and who've bought. In fact, I know a couple people who have actually gone ahead and bought these things. So I don't know in depth, but what I will say about Vision Pro accessibility is that there is a lot of it. It is based on what Apple has done on its other platforms. So you have VoiceOver, you have switch control, you have voice control, you have those features that people know. But there are also those specific features like head gesturing and wrist actions and pointing at the screen, using a pointer finger that are specific to Vision Pro. I can't tell you whether Vision Pro would be as accessible for me as I would like or as my Mac is, but I can tell you that there are a lot of options and that before anybody would write it off or before anybody would buy it, it would be worth spending more than half an hour sitting there to try and figure out how the accessibility for the device works. But they've done a lot. And some of the things that they've done are really ingenious, and I feel like they have to come to some other platforms in some way. I'm not sure exactly how, but I feel like they've put in more work than I, frankly, had expected them to.
What have you seen that you want to see come to other platforms?
Well, just different kinds of input. Maybe we have touchscreen Macs at some point. People have talked about that forever. So if you have a touchscreen Mac, well, there are other ways potentially to do input, whether it's some sort of gesturing, and whether it's something that is an alternative to eye gaze. So you have touch and gaze and pointing with various parts of one's body that all. And I know I'm sort of rambling and not being very focused in terms of what I'm specifically suggesting, but I think that was the reaction that I had to Vision Pro accessibility, was that I felt like they're trying to cover all the field, that they are giving you as many options as your physical body or limitations or accessibility needs allow you. They don't really seem to have left out, okay, your hands don't work, all right, well, let's use your eyes don't work, let's use your head doesn't work, let's use your wrist. Hey, let's use those features in combination, because maybe your hands work okay, but maybe they don't work quite as well as a typical person's do, so maybe you need that head gesture. And I feel like just the sheer combination of accessibility features is what I would like to see migrate to other platforms.
I'm honestly glad to hear you say that, because it seems like when you think about Vision Pro, there are two ways it could go. It could either be this amazing thing that can do a bunch of different things because of all the inputs that they're bringing in. Theoretically, you can control your voice. You're talking about the controlling it with the head movements or wrists or things like that. The other option would be, well, it's called Vision Pro. I mean, I'm really glad to hear that all of those sensors that we hear so much about, and all of those cameras, and all of that is actually hopefully working towards the broadest audience possible.
Right, and to be honest, I was skeptical. It wasn't that I didn't have faith in the fact that Apple would try and put a lot of accessibility features in, because I think there were a few years ago when I might have had that feeling. I remember when Apple Watch came out, we were still sort of uncertain as to how accessibility would work or how much accessibility there would be. And by the time Vision Pro came around, Apple's reputation as an accessibility leader is kind of on the line. If they hadn't done it, they would have been raked over the coals. Even calling it the Vision Pro is not enough to sort of let them off the hook. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like they lived up to that challenge. I don't know. I mean, obviously there are other reasons that not everybody has a Vision Pro, to do with cost and to do with understanding what the killer app might be for your particular use. But I just feel like they've done a lot in terms of accessibility. Would I use one tomorrow? I don't know. Like, I mean, obviously if you gave me one because I'm interested in technology, I would, but would I use that in place of the way I use a Mac or an iPhone in some cases to actually get work done? I don't know whether the way they've implemented accessibility is 100% the best option for me, but I feel like there are a lot of things I could do. I mean, obviously I'd watch immersive content and I'd watch movies and that sort of thing. And I feel like, for somebody like me with low vision, watching a movie right in front of your eyeballs is kind of the best thing ever.
Yeah. I was honestly surprised how good it sounded. Before Vision Pro came out, before I got to do the demo, when they said, well, if you want the best sound, you'll need to spend another $250 on another set of headphones. Right. And while I could easily hear the person who was leading my demo, I had no problem hearing what was going on in the Vision Pro. That was a surprising stunner, since I didn't have an extra pair of headphones with me.
It did sound really good. And I was in an Apple Store environment as well, and I had the same experience. Now, I don't know whether the fidelity, like if you're watching a movie with really high quality sound, THX or 5.1 or 7.1 or whatever, I don't know if that's represented as well in those stems that come on the side of the Vision Pro, but I know that just in terms of like the sound of the things that were in the demo, while also being able to hear what was going on around me in a non-distracting way, I was impressed by it. And I actually didn't think about where the sound was coming from. And that's sort of a mark of the thing. You put it on your head and there's not flaps coming over your ears. It's sort of, the sound is magically there, but you're not quite sure where it's coming from.
Yeah, it is. That part was really strange. I'm kind of bummed I didn't notice it until I was gone. But the fact that I didn't notice it until I was gone, I guess that speaks to how well they did on that.
Yeah.
I do have one other question about the Vision Pro before we move on. How controlled was your demo? where you had a specific thing that you were looking toward, accessibility, were they, because I don't think I made any choices at all in my demo. I did, they said, flip the lever and get the little, nibbly bit of snack or whatever. And I flipped the lever and I got the snack. But I mean, I didn't get to go off the trail at all. Did you, or was it a very controlled demo for you as well?
I feel a little bit of both because I read a lot of accounts of other people's demos after I had been to the demo, and I'm glad I did that because people talk about the Apple employees seeming to be on script and directing you in a certain way. And yeah, he had an order that he wanted me to do things in, but because he was showing me all the different ways to do things accessibly, I got to spend time on that and on the real basics of, I've always said that if you're spending time in the settings of a device, sort of teaches you something about the overall UI. And that's the kind of the way I felt. So in addition to learning how the accessibility settings work, I just sort of made friends with what it's like to use this device as a thing, as opposed to, okay, now you're going to see the shiny thing. You're going to, so I had the opportunity to do that, to learn. And then there were a couple things that I had trouble with, like they would try and get me to point to something on the screen, and because there wasn't really a very good outline of it, I think it was an Apple TV. Oh, I know it was photos. I had real trouble with sort of increasing and decreasing the number of photos that you saw and how you pinched in and out and where to select things. And because I was having trouble, I think I looked at the guy and I said, could we try something else? Could we move on to the video? Because I know that the sort of end of this is going to be this amazing immersive video, and I want to make sure I have time to get to that. Would it be okay if we just moved ahead? And he was pretty flexible with it. And I think the reason for that was that he had been briefed, hey, she wants to talk about accessibility. And so I think I probably got much more flexibility than a lot of other people did with the demo. And so then I got to eventually get to the immersive video, and it was great. And I got as much out of it as I would have expected to get out of it. Sometimes you worry, somebody with low vision, that you're going to miss a thing. Like, I don't particularly get a lot out of 3D as such. You like put on the glasses at the movie theater and whatever. That doesn't do a great deal for me in terms of the way my vision works. But the immersive video, I get it. I remember, I think I once it started, I was like, okay, I get this. I understand this. And that's the sizzle reel, basically. Mm-hmm. So I won't say that I got to see all the things in Vision Pro that I would have liked to, but I will say that I did not feel as constrained as I think some people did who got the sort of standard demo.
Gotcha. So obviously in this internet world, podcasts live forever and videos that are posted online live forever. But as we talk right now, we're about a month and a half away from WWDC 24. And all you future people watching in 2028,
laughing
because we don't know what we didn't know what we were in for. WWDC is about a month and a half away. 2024, that is, month and a half, 2 months maybe, if I looked at a calendar. What's coming up that you're excited about? Particularly, is there anything you're looking for from an accessibility angle or a set of functions that you're anticipating? Because you got excited about some rumor. I don't remember what the rumor was.
God, what was that rumor? I can't even remember now. I'm sure it had to do with AI, because doesn't everything these days? But I believe, I really wish I remember, because I remember that post you talked about, but now I can't remember what it was. I just remember seeing it in Mac Rumors or somewhere and thinking, oh my God, it's an accessibility related rumor.
Well, that was the part that seemed most neat to you. Not even what they were rumoring, but like,
exactly.
hey,
I didn't care. I was just like, oh my God, we have our own rumor.
Right.
Because
we're talking about this, and it's not the 20 seconds they gave it at the keynote. Which, remember keynotes?
Yeah, I remember keynotes. Yeah. So long keynotes. I guess I am looking forward to how, and I hate to say this because I have a lot of skepticism about AI in general, but something else quippy I said on Mastodon was that AI is going to make accessibility amazing and it's going to destroy us all. And I kind of believe that, because AI as a sort of a panacea for everything being great is terrifying. But it's done so much for accessibility in terms of turning information into turning data into information that you can use. And I feel like Apple, in doubling down on AI and finally saying the word AI, the initials AI, is also going to have to pull that through to accessibility even more so than it already has. And it already has done things like personal voice, which is this tool that lets a person with ALS or some other disability that will eventually take their voice, create a cloned version of their voice that they can use later on to speak to their loved ones in. That's an AI-based thing that they did last year. Also, more versions of, or more intelligent versions of things like screen recognition and text recognition and image recognition, which, as I say, take data and turn it into actionable information, whether it's saying, here's an inaccessible screen in your iPhone's UI. I'm going to tell you what's on it, and I'm going to tell you how to use it. And that's essentially what screen recognition kind of sort of does. And so all these are, like, some of these AI functions are going to be sort of small bore. I feel like I lack a little bit of imagination in terms of, like, what's my giant wish list. But I feel like a lot of what Apple's going to do is going to be more proofs of concept that involve using machine learning in some way.
I gotta say, the sudden emphasis that they're putting on AI feels like, as dangerous is the wrong word because there's no danger. Risky is the wrong word because they're one of the most valuable companies on the planet. Apple Vision Pro was putting a stake in the ground and saying, here's where this thing is going. And then we spent 6 or 7 months waiting for it. We all got to do the demo. 5 of us were able to afford one. So we got some idea about that. AI is such a, I don't want to say buzzword, but I will. Such a buzzword right now. I know there's real stuff going on. I know there's real work being done, but it's a buzzword right now. And Apple is teasing that in the way that they have never teased a product before. When they had the iPhone to show off, they showed off the iPhone, but you got to wait 6 months. They had Apple Vision Pro to show off. Same thing with Apple Watch. We got it, but you got to wait. Now they're just teasing this thing, which is the buzziest buzz term out there. It's hard to imagine that whatever they announce at WWDC isn't going to disappoint. And yet they know what they're doing. So it also feels like it has to be, the best thing since sliced bread or something.
I mean, I think partly their hands have been forced because Google and Microsoft and the other companies that went all in on AI when ChatGPT first became a thing have sort of plowed that ground. And so now even their shareholders and journalists or whoever is saying to Apple, well, what are you doing in AI? And Apple for a long time was like, we're Apple, we're cool, we don't even say AI. And then all of a sudden they said it. And in fact, when I first heard them say it, the first person I heard say it from Apple, other than seeing quotes of Tim Cook, but I was at a presentation by Sarah Herlinger, who is the Senior Director of Accessibility Initiatives at Apple, and she was just talking about personal voice and some of the things that have already shipped, because of course it's Apple, and she was using the term AI. And in that particular instance, accessibility, I feel reasonably comfortable talking about it because I know that they have and will do things that rely on AI/machine learning. But yeah, as far as the sort of big picture, what's the splashy thing going to be at WWDC? Or is it going to make the virtual assistant better? Is it going to basically write our shortcuts for us? Is it going to wake us up and feed us breakfast and take us to work? What's it going to do? I do feel like there's a high likelihood of disappointment, probably because we spend around a lot of time sitting around trying to figure out what's going to happen, and then we say, prove us wrong by going one better. And so there is, it's hard.
You've talked a lot about the way that AI is helping with accessibility. Do you use AI like actively? And I don't mean in the way that Apple has always said, there's AI in everything we do. Like, do you turn to ChatGPT to write things for you or to answer questions, or whichever one, not just ChatGPT?
I do, in a really weird, circumspect kind of way. BB Edit, which is my favorite text editor on the Mac, has a ChatGPT module inside of it. I don't have it write for me in ChatGPT. I don't have it write code for me. When I'm, for my day job, one of the things I do is I book guests, and it might be a guest on a topic like climate change or the economic economic model that's going to make electric cars work. or something like whatever my topic is. If I don't have any idea who I want to talk to, sometimes I'll ask ChatGPT to help me find an expert. And it's kind of 50-50 how well it works, because it will often find people that are in the same field but not quite specializing in what I want, or they'll say, here's 4 experts in Michigan, and I'm like, I'm kind of looking for somebody in Texas because we're the Texas Standard. So sometimes I get something out of it, but it's mostly about better search for me. The other thing I do is, as I say, it's an accessibility thing. There's an app called Be My AI, and it comes from this company called Be My Eyes, which basically has volunteers with vision available to a person who is blind. So you get on your phone and you essentially make a phone call. A volunteer picks it up, and you can say, "Hi, can you help me read my serial number on the back of my TV?" Or "Can you help me Can you help me read this food label?" or whatever it is. Well, Be My AI has turned that into an AI-based thing. So I can put a food label below my camera. I can take a picture of it, and instead of simply saying, "Read this," scan it and read it, I can say, "Tell me the instructions," or "How much sodium does this have?" And so I use that sometimes. Or I will take a picture. If I lose an AirPod under my desk, which I often do, I will take a picture under my desk and I will ask Be My AI, "Where is my AirPod?" And it will say, forward to the left of the slipper or something like that. And I can usually find it. So those are a couple things I do.
All right. I must confess, I'm not a user yet. And I don't know what the deal is. When you say you don't use it to write for you, I think, well, of course, because you're a writer. And that's mostly what I do.
I don't want to put myself out of a job,
Right. Exactly. Well, not only that, but I mean, I'm careful about
I think I'm better than it.
Right. Well, it's not even that you're better than it, but although you probably are. But I mean, you've got a voice. You've got a voice that you would use. So I get it. Whatever. And I'm going to have to get.
Well,
probably the thing that's going to get me on the train is whatever Apple does with the next iPhone or the next operating system, because then I'll be like, okay, well, obviously there's going to be no escaping it.
I do kind of feel like I'm kind of annoyed by the inevitability of it, to be honest. Like I use it for those really limited things. But the voice thing reminded me. I had a friend who I'd started writing for 6 Colors a couple years ago, and I had a friend who was a subscriber, but he got his 6 Colors material through an RSS feed, and for some reason the RSS feed did not also push through the author of the piece. So he just saw a headline and he saw a story, and he texted me and he said, "Are you writing for 6 Colors?" And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because it sounds just like you."
Wow.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I want to keep. Let's not have the AI do that. I love the idea that I have enough of a voice that, well, a good friend of mine recognizes it anyway.
Yeah, that's actually wow. That's a great story, truly.
I know, right?
Outside of the whole AI thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, speaking of outside, let's go outside of the whole accessibility thing as well. I know we've talked about Apple Vision Pro, and if that's your answer, that's fine. What has you excited in tech right now?
Oh gosh, that's a hard one. What is well, I'll tell you. I'll be honest, and it's really weird. This only to dip in accessibility briefly. My husband and I got an electric car about 4 months ago. I love that thing so much, and the thing I love about it is learning about it. I have, not only is it the first car we've gotten in 15 years, so it's also the first car that's a smartphone on wheels for us. And so sort of learning all of the things that have been computerized, and then also because it's an electric vehicle, trying to figure out how do you assess your energy usage and the efficiency and all that kind of stuff. And I still don't think I've figured it all out, but I never can remember being as excited to sort of like sit in the car and go, what does this do? What does this do? And we have apps that run it, of course. And, aside from protecting your privacy, which is a challenge because the car companies want all this data about you, and we've tried to be really careful as far as that goes.
Yeah.
But aside from that, like just gathering information and finding out all the things the car knows and hopefully using them. So I think most of that tech is not exclusive to an electric car. It just happens that the electric and the new tech came at once. So we've just been driving around. We talk about the car a lot, which is kind of weird.
Yeah. I got, last summer, I was driving a hybrid for a little bit, and just never got used to the fact that if you're sitting at a light, it's quiet. I mean, it's quiet because it's not idling, it's not waiting. I mean, it is waiting, but okay, yeah. So I guess the one last question I have for you is, what do we not have in tech that you want? What in tech do you think about and go, oh gosh, when we get there, then I'll want something else, but that'll be the thing where I'll have to stop and think.
Well, let's talk about transportation again. I want an autonomous form of transportation that I can feel comfortable with, because whether it's private cars or whether it's transit, I want to walk out of my house and I want to do the thing that anybody who drives a car can do. I want to walk out of my house, pick a destination, and go there without asking anybody for help or checking the timetable of a bus. I just want to go. And I don't get to do that because I don't drive. And so some sort of safe, autonomous transportation system, that would make me pretty happy.
It is always a pleasure to talk to you. We used to do this other show where I would call you every few weeks, and I miss my friends. I should start that show again too.
You should.
Just so I can talk to wonderful people like Shelly Brisbin. Again, the Texas Standard, 6 colors, and the podcast is called Parallel. Just a true pleasure to have you, and thank you very much for joining us today, Shelly.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I had a great time.